Hello, and welcome to Call to Mind Live, Youth Incarceration and Mental Health. I'm Taryn Powell, race and ethnicity reporter at WUWM, Milwaukee's NPR. Today I'll be talking with people who were incarcerated as children and young adults about how their experiences impacted their mental health. And we'll also hear from mental health advocates and community organizers working with young people who've experienced incarceration about possible solutions to addressing their mental health needs. This program is a co-production between WUWM and Call to Mind, American Public Media's initiative to foster new conversations about mental health. Our event is part of the Wellbeings Youth Mental Health Project and its Wellbeings Tour. Wellbeings is a national mental health initiative led by public media organization WETA in Washington, D.C. A quick note to those of you joining us virtually, throughout this discussion, please know you are an important part of this program. If you have a question or comment for our guests, you can use the Zoom Q&A, or if you're watching Facebook Live, leave a question in the comment section. We'll get to as many questions and comments as we can. And when you post, please let us know your name and the city you are in. So I want to first just paint a picture of youth incarceration in the United States. The number of young people incarcerated in this country has been cut in half since 2007. The Sentencing Project, a nonprofit working to minimize imprisonment, says the most recent national data from 2017 shows that more than 43,500 juveniles were in some sort of confinement setting. Despite a decreasing population of incarcerated children, racial disparities persist. In every state, Black kids are more likely to be incarcerated than white kids, about 5 times as likely. American Indian kids are 3 times as likely, and Latino kids are 42% more likely to be incarcerated than white kids. Wisconsin has the 3rd highest Black-white youth incarceration disparity rate in the country. And when it comes to mental health, studies have shown some 70% of incarcerated children have a diagnosable mental health condition. In Wisconsin's Lincoln Hills and Copper Lake correctional facilities, it's much higher. 93% of the children there have a mental health condition, according to the Department of Corrections. Of those young people, 25% have a serious mental illness. How are young people surviving incarceration when they're struggling with a mental health condition? Are facilities meeting their needs? What's available to help young people maintain their mental health after release? We're hoping to answer a few of those questions this evening. In this first discussion, we're going to hear from one individual who was incarcerated as a teen and a mental health counselor from a Milwaukee-based organization that focuses on reentry. A note to our audience, our discussions this evening may touch on sensitive topics involving domestic violence, substance abuse, suicide. If anyone you know is in a crisis or thinking about suicide, trained help is available for you 24/7. Reach out to the crisis text line at 741-741. Text any message to that number and you'll be connected with a crisis counselor as soon as possible. Or you can talk to someone at the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline by calling 800-273-TALK. That's 800-273-8255. Please welcome Roy Rogers with the Wisconsin Alliance for Youth Justice and Amanda Schmidt, Program Director at Project Return. Project Return offers support services for individuals returning to their communities after incarceration, and the Wisconsin Alliance for Youth Justice is an advocacy organization supporting children and families navigating the juvenile justice system. Thank you both for being here.
I'm glad to be here.
Thank you.
Yes. So, Roy, I'm going to toss the first question to you. You and I discussed that you were incarcerated in an adult prison at the age of 16. How did that environment impact your state of mind?
Well, to say the least, right now, it was traumatic. I was a kid in an adult environment. In an adult environment that's pretty violent. I've seen a lot of, just violent behavior. Being a juvenile in what they call a double max prison at that time, we were not segregated from the rest of the adult population. So there was no special attention given us. The correctional officers, they treated you, just like you was one of the adult offenders at that place. Um, a lot of times, individuals my age, you became an easy prey, and so a lot of times we acted out, not because we were just wanted to be rebellious and wild individuals, but by demonstrating that we were not fearful, it kept certain individuals at bay. So putting up a veneer of just being hard and tough uh, became taxing on a lot of us.
Did it feel as though any struggles you might have had mentally were prioritized?
Well, no. Um, when I enter into the adult facilities, no one, no psychiatrist or psychologist came to see or check on me about my mental wellness, my mental health. Matter of fact, I've never even heard those terms during my early years. So it was pretty much I was by myself on this. If you had a problem, the correctional officer would tell you to deal with it. You did an adult crime, now you do this adult time, and that was about as far as the uh, compassion went.
And so you're just a 16-year-old in this environment. How were you able to cope?
Hmm. Well, fortunately for me, and my experience, is pretty exceptional. I happened to run across some people um, who did not want to see a young person like myself continue down the path that led me to prison. So I had a few individuals that took an interest in me, and these men they were part of a juvenile outreach group. It was called a Reach Out program, and their whole philosophy was to try to save at-risk youth from the incarceration that I was experiencing. So that was a good coping for me. But not only that, we had a excellent chaplaincy program there that reached out to me. I was skeptical, but the chaplaincy program seemed very, very sincere in comparison to the non-response that I was getting from the healthcare professionals at that place.
And so how long were you able to like participate in that program?
Well, I was at this particular prison, Columbia Correctional Institution, for like almost 10 years. Um, and I got involved in this reach out program actually right away at the age of 16. They brung me in as a means to number one keep me from going uh, being a part of antisocial behavior, getting caught up in the prison culture of violence, and that program did just that. Um, and it helped me to grow up. It helped me to maintain my sanity. Now, not everybody, other juveniles, was a part of this program. So some of their experience, they was not as fortunate as I. But I was surrounded by a team of individuals who went out of their way to help me.
And I'm glad that you had that team for you. So, Amanda, I want to ask you the next question. You do counseling for formerly incarcerated people through Project Return, and you work with incarcerated youth at the Racine Youthful Offender Correctional Facility. When you meet young people who are incarcerated, what is life like for them mentally and emotionally?
Um, I mean, from what I gather, it's very confusing and difficult because they are taken out of the only environment they own, thrown into another environment that is not. Um, it's punishment more than rehab. It doesn't really get them into a better state of mind. It actually sometimes makes the state of mind worse once they are taken out of anything they know.
And so, what type of mental health needs do you see with the young people you work with?
It can be anywhere from anxiety, depression to like personality disorders and more ones that you're gonna need medicine for. So like schizophrenia, you don't see it a lot. You also see a lot of bipolar that's misdiagnosed. So half the time the people in the prison's diagnosed as bipolar, but really it's just like PTSD, or they're having a trauma response to a certain situation. So that's really hard to then backtrack and start a different like format of that. And it's really hard when you have people misdiagnosed, because that diagnosis stays with you forever. So it's one of the important things when people work with me in Project Return. We make sure what state of mind they're in and what services they need first, before we just throw them back into the community.
And we actually have a question from someone via Zoom. Her name's Patricia, and she's from Milwaukee. And she asks, are there enough treatment providers for each youth in detention facilities? Amanda.
No. It's really sad. A lot of the prisons don't talk about mental health. So when I do go into the prisons, I kind of do it as a resource thing and kind of reducing the stigma around mental illnesses and mental health, because it is so stigmatized. People are just called crazy. They're like looked down on if they acknowledge something is wrong mentally. So it's a real big issue, because even when you do have the therapists and the psychiatrists in the prisons, a lot of people don't use them because of the stigma that comes along with. So there needs to be a lot of work done on the stigma in the communities.
Roy, I want to ask you, did any of the examples that Amanda shared about some of the challenges that the young people she's worked with, does any of that speak to you as far as, your challenges while you were incarcerated? Anxiety, depression?
Yes, yes. Only thing is that at that time, I, along with many others like me, didn't know it was depression. We didn't know what it was, but we was experiencing it. Years later in my, my adult years, I realized, yes, I was going through this, I was going through that, but at that time, I did not know. And I have to say, to be honest, the correctional staff didn't know either, and they attributed everything to antisocial behavior. He has an attitude. And individuals were punished for this. We were placed in segregation, received penalties for actually just acting out of symptoms of pain and mental distress. Um, a lot of juveniles that was in the facility that I was in, we came out of area codes and zip codes that was impoverished, and so lines of communication with family may or may not have been intact. That's an additional stressor, and you're dealing with the everyday hostilities of a prison, whether from your fellow inmate, uh, or the staff, who always have the mentality that you have an attitude and you are a problem. And a lot of times, a lot of my friends end up being placed on psychotropic medications in order to control their behavior. We had a unit at the Columbia Correctional Institution that they called well, derogatorily called it the Smurf unit, but it actually was the Special Management Unit. And it was a place where once you got to a point where whatever mental distress you was going through and you began to act out, well, that's where they would place you. And once you got placed over there, yeah, you were stigmatized forever. And so individuals would rather be placed in a disciplinary environment than to be placed over in the special management unit and be labeled and considered crazy and something is wrong with you, and that you say you're weird or something. So yes, I agree wholeheartedly with what Amanda described.
So when you have, staff that doesn't know what to call specific illnesses, or there is that misdiagnosis, like how do you address that while folks are incarcerated? Amanda?
So it's really hard to address, because the system is just not suitable for a good term would just be, it's not good with change. Like, so it takes forever to get something to move through, and half the time, if you don't have the policy to move it through, no matter what other people are saying, it's still going to be the same. So it's really, really hard. But If I see someone when I'm going in there for like resource fairs or like circles of support, um, I really try to then talk with like the social worker or the therapist that is in the room with us and saying like, hey, we need to do something about this. Um, different stuff like that. Cause it's just, they want to right away go to, oh, this kid is bad, or he just doesn't want to be here. But they never, that's like their first outlet. They never go to like what happened before he came in here, or what happened for this to happen. He's been great for 6 months and now all of a sudden. So they never look back and really ask the teenagers, like, what happened for this behavior to be your new response. And so it's a lot of like coaching and motivational interviewing with the staff that get them to the point of like, hey, he's not a bad kid. The last research fair I was at before COVID at RIAC, the warden actually came over to my table expecting, we had 7 guys around the project return table, and the warden came over like and wanted to start yelling at these guys like, you can't crowd them, you have to be respectful. And she walked over and we were doing interviewing skills and we were talking about feelings and anger and sadness and just like the things they were experiencing on a day-to-day basis, not only inside but on the outside, because some of these, they have families and friends and not all of them can afford to come see them or put money on the phone. So it's also those like they then feel alone. So after she realized the conversation was productive and she was like, how did you get to them to engage? And I'm like, I treated them as a person. I looked at them like they mattered. I wanted to know what was going on with them. I didn't consider them a number or an ID, to just, here's the resources, move to the next table. And that's a lot of the time what teenagers need to just make, then they'll come out, they'll say what's going on. But if they don't feel that loving connection, they're just going to stay bottled up and things are going to get worse.
Yeah.
Roy, we actually
Oh,
have the. Did you have something to add to Amanda's last point?
no, she right on the head, right on the head. Yeah.
So we actually have a question that is from Walter from Milwaukee, and Roy, it's for you. He says, Progressive Baptist Church is very proud of our brother, Roy Rogers. We would like to know the role of faith in mental health while incarcerated.
Yes, indeed. What role of faith while incarcerated towards mental health? Well, I am a prime example of the importance of the faith community during incarceration. Like I said, it was the through the chaplaincy program, which the chaplains were Christians, and I follow the faith of Jesus Christ. And when you ask the question about coping, if it wasn't for my faith in Jesus Christ, that I would have lost my mind. Um, I would have been like some of my friends, some of my close friends, and it's very important because it created a context of love and care, like how Amanda expressed. It provided a humanizing response a lot of the traumas that I was going through, and a lot of my other friends was going through as well. It was available to them if they wanted it. You had a lot of volunteers that would come in and treat people like humans, and so the role of faith in this here is very important because outside of that, um, you really have nothing. And I speak the same thing for some of my friends who were Muslims. They had volunteers, imams come in and to do the same type of thing. We'll see them as a human being, treat them as a human being, and just love up on them, and that began to transform them. It transformed me. But a lot of times, when we begin to receive love like that and we begin to uh, come to our humanity, it's sad to say that a lot of times that does not go hand in hand with correctional objectives because now you don't mind your own business no you care if some wrong is going on with someone else now. You want to reach out and help someone else now, and at times in a prison setting, The philosophy is, hey, you mind your business. Hey, that has nothing to do with you. Hey, if the guy was over there, he's snapping out, throwing things. Hey, inmate, you leave him alone. We gonna take care of him. Instead of allowing us to go, hey, bro, what's going on? Let's sit down. Let's talk. Let's pray. Let's whatever. Let's try to de-escalate the situation, so that you can be well. But they would rather discipline this man, put him in isolation for long periods of time, instead of allowing us to share the same love that was demonstrated towards us.
Amanda, I want to send the next question to you again. We talked about the misdiagnoses and all of that. With such high numbers of children who have mental health needs being incarcerated, is the system properly assessing whether a child is put in jail or a mental health facility?
So that's a really, really hard question. There are certain places that do really good at it, and then there's other places that don't do anything about it. And it's really hard also because unless a person is like, you see their mental health, you see like, the suicide or the paranoid or, those more severe symptoms, unless you see those, a lot of times it's just not even diagnosed. Because unless you have those severe ones, they don't send you to a mental health facility, they incarcerate you. Um, they don't even, a lot of judges and a lot of courts don't even take that into consideration. Um, I know I'm part of the mental health treatment court in Milwaukee. It's a pilot program and it's amazing. And I wish, I'm hoping that it'll stay that way. But they really are starting to consider mental health as a factor in some of the behaviors that are seen in juveniles. So instead of sending people to prison, we want to get them help, we want to get them treatment, we want to get them into an environment that they're safe and we can diagnose these behaviors or actions. So it's really hard. I would say some cities are really good at it, some cities aren't really good at it. And a lot of it's just because, again, it's so stigmatized that a teenage boy or girl is not going to walk up to the lawyer or to the judge and say, I have anxiety, I have depression, because one, they don't know about it, and two, they don't want to be called crazy. So they're just going to hide those feelings and deal with the consequences that come along because that's what they know. And so coming out of that is really, really difficult to a new state of mind. Like Roy was saying, churches and faith communities are very helpful in this because they provide that like supportive, caring network. But not everyone has that. And again, not everyone knows that, what anxiety can do and what depression can do versus actions. And that's where like the misdiagnosed comes along too, because these kids don't even know that they have anxiety or depression. They just live like this forever. And so it's just who they are. So that's where like the complicatedness comes into it.
I want to take some more questions from our audience. Lorna in Milwaukee asks, what are some alternatives to incarcerating youth with mental health issues? Amanda, I will throw that back to you, and then Roy, open the floor to you.
Okay.
So there's a couple organizations out there that are really good. Running Rebels is one of them we work with quite frequently. But like just community-based organizations or programs. So like if a youth gets it, they have to go through these programs inside where there are community organizations out there that can do the same amount of work out imprisoning a person, which is more rehabilitative and actually a better route to go because then they're actually getting the treatment that they need to get and they're not just forgotten about in the system. They have like Pathways is another one. They have programs. Walker's Point has some programs. And a lot of reentry will do whatever, like any reentry stuff, like So Project Return, you don't have to be in prison to come through Project Return. You might just be on probation, or you just might have it into the courts. Like, it isn't like you have to come to Project Return 3 months after you get out of prison. It's, if you have any criminal justice involvement, please come in and get help. So it's kind of like getting those organizations that do work out in the community, instead of, oh, well, Amanda, we have these incarcerated youth. Can you come in and do a program? Like, can we do this program on the outside? So that's really where the focus has to be. And yeah, it might not work for everyone, but it's where we need to start, because there's so much evidence that say if you put a teenager in jail, it's just going to be worse. Like, the behaviors aren't going to get better. They're going to get worse because of the trauma that happens while being incarcerated, not being treated as a person, being ripped away from the only situations you know. There's abandonment there. Like, I could go on for days, but it just shows you that incarceration isn't the answer for mental illness, and we need to stop criminalizing mental illness. And I think that's a really big thing, because even in the news, you see all these people saying, oh, like, I committed it because of mental illness. But do you see any people of color using that diagnosis? No, they just criminalize them right away. And so that's really where the disconnect is there. It's like, why are you criminalizing this person for their mental health, but not criminalizing this other person?
Yeah, excellent. Well, that's a real good question. Alternatives to incarceration for the youth with mental health issues. Um, we definitely need something in place because right now, I don't see that happening on a grand scale. But one thing I do know, the resources to deal with the mental health issues of juveniles are available. My pastor Walter Lanier, he's deeply involved in the mental wellness movement in Milwaukee, and there's many others. And so I know that the mechanisms exist right now, but we have to put them into place. I had a friend many years ago. He was a juvenile. He was 14 years old, and he was waived from the juvenile courts to the adult courts, and he had serious trauma issues. He was a young fella. We seen his murdered, his pops murdered, and he just went down a terrible path. But he suffered from those traumatic events. And once he was in the adult prison setting, things got worse for him. Now, a person like that, he was only representative of majority of the youths that were incarcerated when I went to prison. Um, Things should have been dealt with on a juvenile level in the children's court to find out exactly what this young man had went through, and not to excuse him or absolve him of the crimes that he committed, but to fashion some form of treatment that as he's been held accountable for his behavior, he can get some help for himself. And I believe that's where it needs to start. We have the resources, we have the organizations, but we have to begin to implement it. But it has to start at the juvenile court level, at the children's court level, in order to save the youth. Because once they get into the adult system, they're going to be treated as an adult, and their behaviors will either be penalized or severely medicated with no other type of healing factor to what they're experiencing.
So we actually are in the last, 5 minutes of, this part of the discussion. So the question I'm going to pose to both of you, considering all that we've heard here, about the condition people are up against, and, what are one to two things that should absolutely be prioritized to adequately address mental health for incarcerated young people? And Amanda, I'll let you take that first.
I think that we need to have mental health screenings in the courts, like even before you get to the point of trial or sentencing, for everyone. So a lot of people don't even know that they can get a mental health screening or you can get a mental health assessment done. And then also, we need to open up more beds and more spaces in mental health facilities so there is that option for somebody to go get the help they need, get rehabilitated, and not go to prison. Because even in the adult court system, there's wait lists. I was working with somebody who was waitlisted for 4 months to get to a mental health facility. And until he got there, his treatment wasn't being handled the right way. Because in like the county prisons or the county jails, like if you refuse medicine, they're not going to force it on you. They're just going to stop giving it to you. And that goes for youth and adults. So getting that mental health piece in there and getting the system and the courts to realize how big of a factor it is. I would say that would be my one thing.
And Roy,
Okay.
what's your one thing?
Okay. Well, my one thing is, I would say, for those who are currently incarcerated right now, boots on the ground in the form of we have technology in the form of tablets and kiosks that the men and women incarcerated have access to. We need to get some mental help and mental wellness apps on those tablets, so the individuals can be informed what mental health wellness looks like, what a mental illness looks like, and resource apps on there to show them how to reach out in the event that they do not feel comfortable with dealing with the staff that is surrounding them. There's something that can be easily done right now as an immediate, you know, application to the problem, and then we can build from there.
All right.
That's
Well, thanks
awesome.
to Amanda Schmidt with Project Return and Roy Rogers with the Wisconsin Alliance for Youth Justice for sharing your expertise with us this evening. It's incredibly important to hear from people who have been directly affected by the mental health impacts of youth incarceration. So thank you both.
Okay.
Coming
Thank
up,
you.
we'll hear
Sure.
from
Right, Amanda.
another
Thank you.
person who was incarcerated, who now facilitates community reentry support groups, and will bring more mental health advocates in on the conversation to talk about solutions to addressing young people's mental health before, during, and after incarceration. But first, please enjoy this trailer for the upcoming Ken Burns documentary, Hiding in Plain Sight: Youth Mental Illness.
When you're a teenager, you're at a certain stage in your life where you're kind of like a beginner. It's kind of like a first try at everything in life. And when something abrupt, like someone you know dying from suicide, happens, it hits like a wrecking ball. Everyone is different. Very different. It's very difficult to understand what to do from there.
I never really got a chance to explore my identity until I moved here. The community here is so much more accepting. I started to wear more feminine clothes, started to wear makeup every day. It was good at first, but the day I went to school with pink hair, my car ended up getting vandalized and someone wrote queer on the back windshield. And there's a lot of non-binary kids that are depressed. It's not a symptom of being non-binary, it's a symptom of being marginalized by a society that doesn't accept us.
I think everyone thinks, not my kid. You know, this won't happen to my kid.
The first time they ever found out, they found empty pill bottles in my bag. I think they just hoped that I was just testing things out. They grounded me, and they took my phone away. It didn't do anything. It didn't matter how many consequences I got, nothing was enough to stop me from taking what I wanted. My life was gonna end one way, and that was being addicted to drugs, so why not start now?
I was sort of eating for comfort, and then I would get upset at how much I ate, feel ashamed, and I would have to find a way to get rid of it, and I would just exercise to burn off that same amount of calories. I would wake up in the middle of the night while my roommate was sleeping, and I would start working out. And that's sort of how it spiraled at first. I spend a lot of time in the grocery store when I go. It's overwhelming. You don't have to do drugs and alcohol, but you do have to eat. And you have to eat every day. So food is not really something that I can escape.
I think it's so hard to find an Indigenous person that hasn't dealt with mental illness or some sort of abuse. That's in me, that's within my DNA and myself, and that's something that I have to deal with. Why I wasn't taught my language was because it was literally beaten out of my great-grandparents. The things my ancestors went through, it's shown through alcohol abuse, addictions, non-stable families, toxic relationships. That's the burden that Indigenous youth deal with every day. You're just born into it. Birthright. So not only is trauma embedded in my DNA, but so is resilience. So I know for a fact that my ancestors and my elders, they're rooting for me and they want me to do good. I'll share my story over and over again. I'll go through, those emotions like a million times if it helps one person. In some ways it heals that little scar. It takes away from it.
Apologies for the audio. Welcome back, and thank you all for joining us for the second half of Call to Mind Live, Youth Incarceration and Mental Health. A quick note to those of you joining us virtually, throughout this discussion, please know you are an important part of this program. If you have questions or comments for our guests, you can use the Zoom Q&A, or if you are watching on Facebook Live, leave a question in the comment section. We'll get to as many questions and comments as we can. And when you post, please let us know your name and the city you are in. I have with me Clem Richardson, a substance use counselor with Project Return and the founder of Mana Behavioral Services in Milwaukee. Clem was also incarcerated as a young adult, first entering the system when he was 18. We have Charlene Moore, Executive Director of Urban Underground, a youth leadership and social justice organization, also in Milwaukee. And finally, we have Dr. Henry Bay, a licensed psychologist and certified dialectical behavioral therapy clinician. Dr. Bay is also assisting Milwaukee County with implementing a DBT program in the Milwaukee County Secure Juvenile Detention Center. Welcome to all of you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Another note to our audience, our discussions this evening may touch on sensitive topics involving domestic violence, substance use, and suicide. Please know that if you or anyone you know is in a crisis or thinking about suicide, trained help is available for you 24/7. You can talk to someone at the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline by calling 800-273-TALK. That's 800-273-8255. Or text any message to the crisis text line at 741-741, and you'll be connected with a crisis counselor as soon as possible. Clem, I am going to start with you. I'd like to start by giving you the space to share some of your experience dealing with your mental health while incarcerated. You and I talked about you going through the county jail system and the House of Corrections. How would you describe the conditions you were in and how they affected your mental health?
Yes, thanks for answering that, Taryn. Definitely impacted me. Depression, anger, um, you know, very dirty conditions and whatnot. The COs talking at you, and so those are some of the things that I experienced while in there as a youth, and a young adult too as well. In the house correction, pretty much in a dorm C, bed 72, in there with 72 other men. So my experience was violent and definitely being aggressive because you don't want to get taken advantage of. So just dealing with the anxiety and dealing with the conditions of the living in those conditions was really horrific back in the 80s. I mean, it was really, really a bad time during the 1980s. That was the peak of the crack cocaine epidemic right there. And so just even in and out of those systems, before even leaving my neighborhood, I was in a mental incarceration from dealing with that. So just going to physical incarceration has definitely plays on your psyche.
Mm. And yeah, you mentioned being a prisoner kind of in your environment, right? Also in our
That's right.
conversation. Um, and you mentioned just what you were seeing in the community, in your home. It was affecting you mentally
Mhm.
even before incarceration. So,
Yeah.
without getting overly specific, can you share what a couple of those experiences were and why environmental
Yeah.
factors are important to consider when addressing mental health in young people?
Yeah, most definitely. So, research says 80% of the homes is raised by single parent homes. My mother was a single mother, did the best that she can do. 5 boys, 2 girls. I'm number 6. So my dad was not in the home. So he had 17 kids. I'm number 16 over there. So you already go figure. There was nobody at my basketball games. My mother had to work and do the best she could. So pretty much my older siblings were into prostitution, violence, robbing people, selling drugs. I saw domestic violence and that type of stuff like that. So that impacted me. So by the time I was 13 years old, I started selling marijuana. By the time I was 15, I was selling powder cocaine. By the time I was 21, I was selling crack cocaine because the crack cocaine epidemic hit. My sister committed suicide at 19 years old, so that really messed up our psyche because we didn't talk about issues or what was going on. So just being involved in that, being involved with gangs and in the culture. I grew up in the 532-606 area, around for 21st and Capitol. So that right there helped protect me and shape me as a man because I didn't have that manhood stuff that was going on because it was too much stuff was going on. So that right there and the environmental factor plays a big important part to your mindset when you don't have anyone there to coach you to do the right things. So that played a big important part. So just getting involved with that, using the drugs really helped me to keep calm and deal with situations. It helped me to numb the pain and the trauma that I was going through. So then I became addicted to the drugs and the lifestyle for 18 years. I was crack cocaine addicted and in and out of numerous drug treatment programs and WCS, Matt Talbot Recovery Center. By that time, I finally got it together, turned my life over to the Lord, and I didn't look back from there. So that's where I'm at.
Thank you for sharing that. And I did
No
also
problem.
want to just remind our viewers again, for the sensitive topics that we're discussing this evening. If you or anyone you know is in crisis or thinking about suicide, trained help is available for you 24/7. Reach out to the crisis text line at 741-741. Any message, even hello, and you'll be connected with a crisis counselor as soon as possible. Now, Charlene, I kind of want to continue just the conversation about environmental impacts. That's also something you and I discussed just briefly. So, in your experience working with young people, what can you share about how the environment impacts their mental health?
Absolutely. I want to first just pay homage to those individuals that have been locked up as young people and have spent decades behind bars and is now out. and young people and young adults and adults that are currently incarcerated. Our hearts and love goes out to their family, and we want to let them know that we're continuing to fight. When we talk about the environment, Taryn, that is such a critical aspect around the well-being of an individual, not just a child, not just an adult, but just human beings. For those that are not from the great city of Milwaukee, Milwaukee is a great place to be. However, there are also some struggles and some challenges that we're experiencing. When we talk about systemic structures that are in place and are designed in a way that people of color in communities have been driven into particular areas that have exacerbated poverty, mental health, unequitable educational systems, healthcare, inadequate healthcare, and the list just goes on and on. We have designed a system that has not been at the benefit of people of color. And young people, they're the ones that have suffered the most because they grow up. They grow up to be impacted adults, and they go into situations that they don't know how to deal with and they don't know how to handle. So the system in and of itself and our structure, we have to do better, and we need to do better.
I want to go to one of the questions from our viewers, and Charlotte and I will ask this of you. Mary Beth from Fox Point asks, how can we support families who have young people who are incarcerated and need mental health care?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think each of us has our own lane. So, Mary Beth, when we talk about how can we support impacted young people and their families, I think it first starts with taking a look internally. I tell people this all the time. We are a part of a village, and it is up to us to do our part. So whether it's to number one, so find out what's in your area or find out what's in your state or the community, share resources. You may know something, you may have a particular set of skills, share that. You may have financial resources that you can use to support. You may have time that you can give. And so it doesn't take, a lot of times we think, oh, it's going to take these sort of systemic changes. Yes, that's a part of it. Don't get me wrong. But when we talk about each individual person, when you see a young person, look them in the eye, tell them hello, let them know that you see them. It doesn't take much. Don't allow fear, particularly when dealing with youth of color. Don't let fear lead the way. And so figure out what your lane is. If you don't know what's out there, ask around. There's folks that know what's going on, what's in your community, what's in other people's communities that you can get involved in. Ask. That's the least you can do, and then figure out how to plug in.
Thank you, Charlene. Henry, I want to give you a chance to tell us a little bit of the work that's happening with some incarcerated young folks where you work. I mentioned you did the dialectical behavioral therapy. So explain how that works.
Yeah, so DBT is a therapy that was designed to help people find better, more effective ways to cope with big emotions. So when we think about a lot of the difficulties that we see youth having, and oftentimes difficulties that lead them to detention, they're behaviors that are driven by big emotions, and oftentimes they're not. They haven't learned skills to cope with those emotions in ways that will help them be successful. A lot of times we spend a lot of time just trying to understand what are emotions and kind of understanding the different emotions, what their functions are, and then how to cope with emotions so that they don't influence impulsive behaviors. And so in the juvenile detention center, we're working on setting up a DBT program. For the past year, we've been running a DBT skills group, myself and Running Rebels advocates have been in there multiple times a week. Running Rebels is there every day, and we are trying to set up a whole therapy program designed to help the youth in detention find new, more effective ways to cope with big emotions, to cope with challenges in their life and stressors, and overall have more control over the direction their life is taking.
And so how would you say this work that you've been doing, like how it's helped or impacted the young people?
It is amazing going into detention and, you know, starting with kids that have never heard of DBT, never heard of these skills. And, you know, in a few months, all of a sudden they are spontaneously using these DBT skills in situations that in the past would have led to fights or led to restrictions or led to being locked in. And they're like, hey, I used, you know, my stop skill. I used my tip skills. I used Dear Man. And they just start demonstrating these new behaviors, and you see it decreasing fights, restrictions. You see it help, and you see them kind of feel a sense of mastery over, like, wow, I just prevented that situation from going south quickly. So it's really cool to see, and they take to it very, very quickly.
So I'm going to go again to a couple questions that we have from our audience. Debbie in Milwaukee asks, who do we talk to if we have ideas for improving mental health in Milwaukee? Clem, I will send that question to you.
Yeah, well, you reach out. You can reach out to Project Return. You have Mental Health of America. You have different organizations that you can call and connect with. You know, so there's definitely out there. There's another program. I happen to be on the board. It's called Hope Through Restoration. One of my guys that we used to be out in the streets together and whatnot. He's in and out of Ethan Allen School for Boys when he was a teenager. And so we started a program where this program has an after-school program, after incarceration development program, and it's a youth housing development program. I think Dr. Henry was talking about the environment where the anger and all that's happening. That's good that they practice that in that environment. But once they come back out, they go into those poverty-stricken areas in those environments where they have to put that mask back on, where they don't want to be taken advantage of, or they got it on survival mode. But yeah, to answer your question, yes, please reach out. You can help us out too as well. If you have any questions, you can definitely get my information.
And I want you to keep the mic here. How has mental health for formerly incarcerated folks changed over time, and what's being done now? What have you seen?
Yeah, well, what I've seen when I was coming up, I didn't see the language. We knew what was going on. Something wasn't right, but we didn't have the language that goes with it. So now we have the language, the information, the data. All right. If we look back at Dr. Joy Dufry, she talks about how the conditions of African people as a direct link from descendants of results of chattel slavery from our ancestors. So you see a lot of that. You see it's in our DNA, and research shows that. So what's being done now? People talking about it a lot more. They might not talk about it openly, but they do become behind the scenes, or they might call and ask me on Psychology Today, or they may ask for a business card. So some people are getting the help that they need. With the ones that's coming out of prison, when I work with them in Project Return, these men, like I think Amanda said it, they're overdiagnosed or underdiagnosed. Usually 9 times out of 10 is usually a PTSD. It's usually dealt with something like that. And so with the prison, what they do is they over medicate them so they don't have to deal with the violent behaviors. And so when these guys get out, they start medicating and using the drugs to cope with. But then once they come to us, we kind of help them through and, you know, talk to them and provide resources for them. So there's some things are happening. We're seeing a big change in it, but then there needs to be more. We all hands on deck. We need more boots on the ground, and we need to collaborate and work together with this because it's issues everywhere. Matter of fact, the whole United States got PTSD right now.
Charlene, how often do you see young people end up incarcerated when they should have been receiving mental health care instead?
Yeah. It seems like that's the story for so many individuals. And I think we're living in a society where we have not learned how to support people in a very humane way. So, traditional, right? So you do something wrong, you go to jail, right? That's typically sort of the theory. You do something wrong, you go to jail. We haven't instituted as much as we can when it comes to restorative practices. What Dr. Henry talked about was simply providing individuals with the tools and the skill sets in order to be able to make decisions effectively, right? Just recently in Milwaukee, there was an incident where 4 people got shot, and it all started off with a parking spot. And I thought about, like, how in the world, and 3 of them died. And again, it was a lot more than the parking spot, but it was initiated from some very simple conflict that no one had the skill set to say, okay, hold on a second. Let me just, we're having a conflict here. Let me stop. Let's walk. Can we talk about this? Right? That didn't happen. And so during in the beginning trailer, in the beginning introduction, the 2 words that I would bring up was prevention and intervention. We need to do a lot more. So when we talk about DBT skills, we shouldn't be providing that when young people are incarcerated or when adults get to this incarcerated setting. We should be talking about these sorts of skill sets when young people are in kindergarten, when they're in elementary school. Those are the things that will live with them, and they will understand, all right, baby, you got to know how to share your crayons. You got to learn how to work with each other, right? Like it's the type of language that we start to provide children, that we should be providing children from a very, very early age. So when young people get to me, they're in high school. They should already have certain skill set, but what I'm realizing more and more over the years, young people are not being equipped with the necessary skills in order to be successful. So there's a disconnect. We definitely have a disconnect there, but it leads young people down a path and because our communities are so over policed, because we would rather spend more money policing and in our police system, we haven't put a lot of money into violence prevention. We haven't put a lot of money into, health prevention, those sorts of things that are absolutely needed in order to build thriving communities. So we're at a fault here. And it's important that our community understand we have to take a pause and would say what needs to be done, where do the resources need to be reallocated to, and figure out what to do. We can absolutely get there.
That's so true, Charlene. We can't. Can I share something, Taryn? Respond to that.
Yes, go ahead.
The definitely the family, the parental parents plays a big important part. Because I used to do in-home therapy. I done worked with youth at SDC. I was a youth counselor. I did gang prevention, the SDC, CYD, and all that. So going in the homes in that environment, they don't have anyone to kind of coach them and teach those coping skills. And so, and Charlene is right. By the time they get to us, they are already stealing cars. They already got guns. They already involved in those high-risk behaviors because there's no one in there coaching them and teaching them something different. So we have to find a way to bring the family into the fold, even though the father might not be in the home. You got a lot of good mothers out there. You got a lot of single fathers raising their kids too now. And so because of what's the dynamic that's happening in our community, we need all hands on deck, even the parents, to get involved. Don't just come to the school when the kid have a fight or get suspended. Come to teachers conference when we can do some prevention before they start, failing in their grades or something like that. So I definitely agree with that comment, but definitely we need all hands on deck. So.
And if I could just jump in, and I agree, I'll third all of that. I think this idea of prevention and getting skill sets to everyone at a young age is huge. I know there is a new kind of form of DBT called DBT in the schools, which is designed to be taught as like a health class, right, to general school populations. And it again, it's not being reactive and waiting until youth are incarcerated. It's being proactive and saying, hey, like, everyone could use these skills of how to solve problems, cope with emotions, resolve conflict. So I 100% agree. I also think the thing that I see as very sad and very difficult is that you see these behaviors that are coming from a lack of learned skill, right? Like lacking certain tools, and it results in behaviors that then get labeled as bad or antisocial, when really they're just due to a skills that need to be learned. And so I think these human beings get judged as bad or antisocial when really it's needing to help teach them new skills.
Yeah, that's true. The parents. I'm sorry, Taryn. Go ahead.
No. Continue.
Yeah, with the parents play a bigger part. I teach anger management, and these guys did homicides. My brother was party to a homicide. We did violence. It's those belief systems that keep us caught up. And the family tell them, if a kid hits you, knock their head off or punch them, then they grow up with that belief system. So with that and going in those different environments, they learn the coping skills. They learn how to stop, think, plan before you act. We teach all that. Take a time out, count to 10, count backwards. But when they go back into that environment or they go back to those certain situations, it becomes a serious issue. Out of the 63% of the youth or adults that get out of prison, they're back in there within almost 3 years. They're right back in there. And usually it's due to an emotional buildup. Something happened where it triggered the emotion, and they used to use drugs and alcohol, or it's due to the mental health. They don't know how to act and stay cool, calm, and collected. So they usually come right back to prison. So not just one time, 2 or 3 bits, and so we need something. I agree with prevention, but we need to have it for the youth, the kids, and the adult sector too as well. So.
Yeah.
So I'm going to go back to another submitted question we have from Shonda in Racine. She says her 17-year-old son was charged as an adult and sentenced to 36 and a half years. He is now 21 and has not had any age-appropriate treatment. She asks, are there any resources to help guide us, I'm assuming she means the family, to ensure he is not lost in the system and can get the help that he so desperately needs? Dr. Henry, I will toss that one to you first.
I am going to graciously toss this one back to Clem and Charlene. This is one that's out of my expertise.
Yeah.
Go ahead,
Clem, if
Charlene.
I'm gonna let you follow up really quick, but number one, I want to say my heart and my love goes out to you. It is not easy supporting a young person that is locked up, especially with how our current system is designed. There is no easy answer to the question you just asked. All I can say is you have to continue to be an advocate for your son. No, at all costs. The road is long, and it's weary, but they find support services. There are some in Racine. I know that it is. There are support services there. Find out who those groups are and get connected with them. But when I say that, and I'll preface it by saying I have a young person right now that is currently locked up. He's doing 8 years. He gets out. Thank God, he gets out in November next month. And he was in my program ever since he was in high school. And this young man, he was adopted as a child, had extreme mental health issues. And it got worse and worse the older he got. And so at school, guess what? You know what you do with those kids that can't sit down and be quiet, or, you kick them out, you suspend them, you expel them. They go from place to place. He went from the home to a group home. Like, it was this never ending story until he did something not so smart, didn't have those DBT skills, and he ended up being charged for an armed robbery, and with a BB gun, right? And so I say all that to say, during his time locked up, he cut himself extensively. During the 8 years that he was locked up, I guarantee you that he probably spent about 85% of that time in solitary, in the hole. Every time I wanted to go and visit, guess what? He was in the hole. And they didn't give him just a couple weeks. They didn't even give him just 30 days. They would start with 3 months at a time, 9 months at a time, right? It floored me, the type of treatment that they gave individuals with mental health issues. And you know what he told me sometimes the reason why he cut himself was so that he can get some attention, whether it was positive or negative. Prison breeds this sort of thing. It breeds. So if you have mental health, God help you, because it's then exacerbated. They don't have the proper care. They don't have enough staff. Everybody's on a waiting list for all the great programs. Waiting list, waiting list, waiting list. It breaks my heart, because I've been connected with so many different type of young people. The young adult that came out from Lincoln Hills that I cared for, she spent about 4 years. She got in. She was incarcerated at age 12. I keep her picture next to me all the time. Donna. She looked like a little girl in this picture. She's 17 in this picture. At age 12, she was incarcerated. And you know what they did to her? They pumped her up with medication after medication after medication after medication. You can't sleep? They got something for that. You can't stay still? We got something for that. No programs, no this, no that, but we can pump you up with medication. Like, our system, you all, is completely flawed. So sis, please get connected. Please get some support services, because no matter the long haul, your son is going to need you. Please get in touch with us.
Yes,
And
I
Clem,
agree,
your last thought?
Charlene. Yes, definitely. She needs to reach out and get some help. I work with lifers all the time. And one of my guys I mentor, he's got out of Marshall Correctional's prison reentry program, came through Project Return. He did 32 years. He went to prison when he was 17 years old. The police had him sign a waiver, said you'll go home. He couldn't even read or write. He just signed, thought he was going home, and they took him to Green Bay Penitentiary. So he's in their lifer program at 17 years old, didn't know how to read or write. So he turned to violence because he didn't want to get taken advantage of. And so he had locks on the sock, went into sex, that means segregation. Finally, the chaplain started working with him. He learned how to read. Once he started learning how to read, he became a model lifer. They told him you would never get out. What kept his sanity, he stayed in the law library, and he continued to write. He connected with the Innocent Project, and they freed him about 5 years ago. So he's a returning citizen. He's working. He's a cook. He's an advocate and doing some great things in the community. That's how he dealt with his mental health. So his family was involved. Ma'am, you got to get connected. Please call Project Return. We have circles of support for family members. We have a lot of guys that we're connected with. I'm working with a guy right now who did 46 years. He's out. I'm working with another guy who's from Racine, actually from Milwaukee, but moved to Racine. He did 36 years in prison. He's out. Mm-hmm. So there is hope. And they did have some PTSD or trauma, but with the word of God, all things are possible. So that's what helped them with their healing and whatnot, and natural medication too as well. So that's my thoughts on that.
And really quick before Taryn jump in, just really quick, what I just wanted to touch on what Clem just said. Most of the people that are incarcerated, folks, the majority of them are going to get out.
Yes,
The
right.
majority of the people that are locked up are going to get out. So if we're not going to invest the resources, number one, before they get locked up, but while they're in, if we're not going to invest the resources into their health and development, knowing that they're going to come out, we've already done them a disservice. And again, we're talking about systemic infrastructure. In order for this system to continue to working the way it's been designed, we got to get people to keep coming back. So guess what? Minimum programs that's going to support the needs of individuals that are currently incarcerated.
That's so true,
Well, Charlene,
Charlene. You can't. I'm sorry.
Do you want another 30 seconds, Clem?
Okay, you can. It's my passion coming out. You cannot treat a mental health or drug addiction in prison. They need more programming. Minnesota gets it. They do more programming and prevention compared to Wisconsin, do more incarceration. So that's just it for me.
All right. And that was a good resource to end with. So you letting people know where the things are working. So much thanks to Clem Richardson with Project Return and Mana Behavioral Services, Charlene Moore, Executive Director of Urban Underground, and Dr. Henry Bay for closing us out tonight. From WUWM, Call to Mind, and WETA, thank you for joining us for this Wellbeings Tour event. This is Call to Mind Live, Youth Incarceration and Mental Health, a special program co-produced by WUWM and Call to Mind, American Public Media's initiative to foster new conversations about mental health. Our event is part of the Wellbeings Tour, a national public media initiative from WETA focusing on youth mental health. You can find resources that support youth mental health in our Wellbeings Toolkit. Visit wellbeings.org, calltomindnow.org, or wuwm.com/calltomindlive to find more information. And please stick around for a few final messages from our partners. Please keep streaming, and we hope you'll participate in a brief event survey and let us know how to make future events even better. Thank you again to our panelists, and thank you all for joining us today. I'm Taryn Powell.
The We Are Wellbeings story wall is a central part of the wellbeings.org website, social media platform, and the Wellbeings National Tour. We are asking the public of all ages to submit personal reflections, videos, photos, and short stories to offer hope, to foster understanding, to build community, and break down stigma.
What does being well mean to you? What is the one thing you wish people knew about mental health? What is your passion? What's your story?
Video can easily be submitted via social media using the hashtag #wellbeings or emailed to info@wellbeings.org.
Stories can also be submitted by uploading to Dropbox and live at Wellbeings Tour events. The We Are Wellbeings story wall is made possible through generous support provided by Wellbeings Youth Mental Health Project founding corporate sponsor Otska and Wellbeings media partner People.
It's time to change the conversation about mental health.
When you know something is wrong.
When you feel alone. When you can't explain what hurts.
When every day is a struggle.
When you can't ask for help.
When your friend or family member seems fine on the outside.
But hurts on the inside.
Sometimes I feel as though I'm the only one that feels. But I know that's not true.
We can change.
We can change.
We can change.
We can make a difference.
There's power in our difference.
We can support each other.
We can fight stigma.
We say it's okay.
It's okay.
It's okay to have a mental health condition.
We all want to feel heard.
To find hope.
And to live in a world without stigma
without discrimination.
And we are a force to be reckoned with.
I am not what happened to me.
I am how I overcame it.
Stand with us.
And discrimination in mental health.
You can see the person, not the condition.
You can build understanding.
You can play your part.
The conversation changes with me.
With me.
With me.
We are well-beings.
We are all well-beings.